Secondly, Mr. Scaramucci,
We agree.
the thing is, there is a buffer zone around Gaza. There has been for a very long time. That's why we call October 7th, not the second week of October or, the autumn of 2023.
I say this as someone who is, most everybody on this panel would think I'm idiotically pro-Israel. I am. But October 7th changed everything for Israel. The days of them living next door to a terrorist group like Hamas, not acknowledging Israel's right to exist, those days are done.
And this is their plan. And what's worse is they don't even really care that much about the Gaza Strip. It's the West Bank that they want. But they're going to go ahead and try to take care of this while they can.
Welcome back, everybody, to Z's Political Couch. At this point, it seems Piers Morgan sounds like a broken record. Every other episode, it's the same repeated narrative, no matter how you drill it to him about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But that's why we have Scott Horton on this panel today. He's about to light a fire under this panel, and here's why. He's going to dismantle the flimsy narrative being band-aid with razor-sharp wit, particularly zeroing in on Piers' blatant double standards, which, let's be honest, sounds more like a political polar trick than a principled stance. His blend of humor and uncompromising logic will sling through the clutter of half-truths and exaggerations, leaving the rest of the panel scrambling for a coherent comeback. Scott's explosive take isn't just a rebuttal, it's a masterclass in shutting down incoherent arguments while keeping this conversation as engaging as it is incendiary. Let's jump in.
Okay, Anthony, I think you've got a slight hard out today, but I just wanted to talk to you about what's happening with Israel. The IDF, as we've been talking, says it's launched a new limited ground invasion in Gaza. The Israeli government says it's to retake part of a key corridor into Gaza. Obviously, this follows extensive airstrikes in the last 2 days. We have to go on the the health authority, which is Hamas run, on the death toll, but it's believed up to 1,000 people may have been killed in the last 2 days in this new offensive, which has obviously shattered the ceasefire. Now, I get the argument from the Israeli side that if Hamas is suspending the process of releasing the hostages, there's still nearly 60 who are being held, they believe, who are still alive. But if it is doing that, then obviously at some point, Israel is going to have to do something to try and force them to release them. Is it, though, the right course of action to go out and create 1,000 more deaths, whatever it may be, including God knows how many children, because half the population is under 18. I just think the optics of this for Israel are terrible. And I also think that their central point, which is the whole war is about eliminating Hamas. At the moment, there's no sign they've done that at all. In fact, by releasing hundreds and hundreds of Palestinian prisoners as part of this hostage deal, they're running back, presumably many of them aligned ideologically with Hamas. We've seen with the release of the hostages so much support for Hamas on the ground in Gaza still. So they don't seem to be achieving the central aim of the war. What they're doing is just killing more and more people, which I have always felt at some stage will just start to fuel rather than kill off the ideology.
Well, listen, this is going to be a controversial statement. I'm sure I'm going to inflame everybody that's on the panel with me. But I always thought that they needed to create a buffer zone there, and they should have done that with some level of cooperation in the Arab world. I think that the president actually hurt the situation by saying he was going to, I guess, move 1.8 million people out of the region. Obviously, his allies in the Gulf rejected that out of hand, and he had a reverse course last week by saying, of course, he's not going to do that. But to me, I think what they're doing is actually hardening opposition against Israel. And I'm obviously a strong proponent for Israel, and I'm a supporter of Israel, but I don't think we can support indiscriminate death. I think it's just something that, imagine if Winston Churchill guys or any of our allies during the war, we killed 400,000 German civilians through the bombings. And the bombing of Dresden, Piers, I know you know a lot about it. Yep. Curtis LeMay is obviously a war criminal based on what he did in Dresden, but it wasn't well reported. Just imagine if these people had this type of reporting or your show going on during the Second World War. So, to me, the
but that was
obvious
one
thing
of the
to have done
reasons
there
why
was-
we created things like the Geneva Convention. I mean, there was a widespread acceptance that there were
100%.
horrific crimes
So
committed during the war, which should not be allowed to happen again. I thought Dresden was appalling, and should not be allowed to have happened. But that was why they set up the Geneva Convention and other instruments to avoid
I just want to make this point then. So why didn't we have an international coalition of people? There's a lot of willing people to create a strategic buffer zone in the Gaza Strip between Israel and the Gaza. And then, the issue related to the political support around Hamas, we could address that by taking the security concern away from Israel. And so what Israel's saying right now is that we're threatened by Hamas. Hamas has lots of political support. We're going to continue to bomb them until morale improves. And that has never worked, Piers.
I can answer that.
Okay. Go ahead.
First of all,
Joe.
I think it's important, and everyone on this panel and in this audience has heard Israeli officials invoke Dresden and Tokyo and Hiroshima and Nagasaki as the precedent for why they can bomb this Indian reservation the way America took it out on Hitler and Tojo, which is completely insane and, as noted, completely illegal, because that's why they wrote the Geneva Conventions in the first place. Secondly, Mr. Scaramucci,
we agree.
The thing is, there is a buffer zone around Gaza. There has been for a very long time. That's why we call October 7th, not the second week of October or, the autumn of 2023. It lasted one day because what happened essentially was people broke out of their pen because the Israeli security forces were completely negligent in their so-called duty to keep those people locked in there. They literally had automatic machine guns like Idiocracy on remote control, and they got caught with their pants down on a Saturday morning, but the whole thing was over by midnight. Okay, so there is a buffer zone. In other words, they don't have to do this at all. They never did. And when it comes to the entire history of Israel-Palestine, since the creation of the state, their special operations forces and spies have shown that they can reach out and touch someone one at a time. They do it all the time when that's what they want to do. Instead, what they've done here is level the place, invoking Dresden, level the place to make it uninhabitable because they want to steal it. They want to drive the Palestinians out of there. If they can't push them into Egypt, now they're pushing them into Syria. The Wall Street Journal even let a couple of Israeli officials run an article in our paper saying, you take them, you love the Palestinians so much. And this is their plan. And what's worse is they don't even really care that much about the Gaza Strip. It's the West Bank that they want. But they're going to go ahead and try to take care of this while they can. And that's why they broke the ceasefire. They don't want a ceasefire.
Okay.
They gave Trump
I want to give Anthony the chance to respond before we let you go.
You probably don't have
Anthony.
time for me to respond to that, but that does deserve a response.
Yeah.
But go ahead,
Sure.
Piers.
No, Anthony, but before you go, just respond to that.
You could go back to 9/11. The way the Americans responded was very aggressive in 9/11, and it was an overreach to go into Iraq. So we're in agreement that there's an overreach going on right now. But if you're telling me you're in a seat of political leadership and there's an attack like that, and I've seen the 47-minute IDF film, and I just ask you to put yourself in the shoes of an Israeli political leader, you're in a very, very tough spot in terms of how you're going to protect your country. You're right about the dereliction of duty at the border on that Sunday morning, but I'm just telling you, they were in a tough spot.
What I'm saying is they
had to
could have
respond.
I would add this point, which is, Scott, I would say this. The scale of what Hamas did that day, 3,000 of them in 3 waves, coming over the border, committing mass, horrific acts of terrorism against anyone
Rape,
they could get their hands on. 1,200 were murdered, at least. 250 odd were kidnapped, including babies, Holocaust survivors, and so on. Nearly 7,000 more were wounded. The idea that Hamas launched such an enormous attack on Israel without knowing for an absolute certainty as they did so the scale of Israel's response was going to be equally enormous, if not a lot more so. I think it's for the birds. And listen, you can go back in any...
Nobody ever said
It would have been
that.
politically
I agree with you, by the way,
irresponsible
about the argument they broke out of the pen. I get all this. I get the argument that, you know, the Palestinians have been oppressed for a long period of time, that they should have equal rights. I agree with all this. There should be a two-state solution, everything. But anyone that tries to in any way mitigate or downplay the scale of what Hamas did, and that is why it runs so deep, I think, on the Israeli side.
Look,
I think
Piers,
that is part of the problem here.
I didn't say anything to diminish.
No, I'm not
Hamas
saying you
did.
did. I'm just saying that some.
Okay, well, I just want,
No, we've got to let the mooch go.
that.
Anthony, I really appreciate you joining us. I know you.
appreciate.
I've stolen 6 more
appreciate
minutes than I was
being on,
supposed to
guys.
from you, Anthony. Every minute is gold. You know that.
It's okay. I just had a radio.
I know you do,
Piers,
and I really
I love you.
appreciate.
Thank you for having me on, guys.
Scaramucci.
Really
Very
appreciate
grateful
joining
for
you, and I'm loving your show. Thank you very much. Great to see you. Let's just pick up with the rest of the panel. I mean, Natalie, it seems to me that Israel is not achieving its aim. It can level as much of Gaza as it wants, but ultimately it is not, according to all independent studies of what's happening there, it is not eliminating Hamas or its ideology. In fact, if anything, it might be fueling even more hate towards Israel.
No, exactly. I mean, it looks like it's shaping up to be another forever war. And I really take the viewpoint that I care about this from the America First perspective. I don't think the United States should be continuing to fan the flames of war anywhere, let alone when you look at the atrocities that have been committed on both sides. Obviously, it's a very heated issue. But to that point, I think when you look at the college campus demonstrations that we had, or even the advocacy of people like Mahmoud Khalil, right? That's a case that's really in the forefront of everyone's mind right now. You know, he hates Israel and by extension the United States of America because of a conflict that's going on very, very, very far away from us that we're entangled in because of, I would argue, along with, you know, political influence and stuff, but also it has to do with energy dominance and oil. That's also what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. And when I see conflicts like this, my first and foremost priority obviously is putting America first, but it's also the importance, I think, of American energy independence and, frankly, American energy dominance, so we're not so embedded with whatever country it may be, Ukraine, or in this case, it's Israel, and having to support countries for reasons that are not explicitly or demonstrably beneficial to Americans that lead us to essentially importing a bunch of people, if not homegrown Americans, who sort of have an affinity or an allegiance to Hamas because they really dislike what Israel's doing.
Yeah, and you know, it's very interesting, Joe, I think, the way the Republicans, a lot of Republicans view Ukraine as a very different situation to Israel and Hamas. You know, I had a big argument with Tucker Carlson about this because I said, well, I don't understand. If the reason for getting out of Ukraine and not helping Ukraine is America first, you don't want to get involved in foreign wars many, many thousands of miles away from America's border. It's not in American national interest. Okay, it's a perfectly reasonable argument you can have, particularly as America's been involved in so many wars that you cannot point to much victory in the last 70, 80 years. But what is the distinction then, ideologically, between then getting involved in helping Israel in a war over in the Middle East? And they sort of, they go through a real set of hoops trying to explain to me why one is okay and the other one isn't, when it seems to me you're either against both of it or you probably instinctively support both.
Piers, that's a great point. And look, I say this as someone who is, most everybody on this panel would think I'm idiotically pro-Israel. I am. But the Israel caucus, Israel has great influence on my former party, the Republican Party. Israel also, Piers, though, is a great, great long ally of ours. You beautifully, Piers, described what October 7th was. And again, I know we have to find a solution, but October 7th changed everything for Israel. The days of them living next door to a terrorist group like Hamas, not acknowledging Israel's right to exist, those days are done. So yeah, there needs to be some sort of big, broad solution here, and the moderate Arab world needs to get involved damn quickly, but we're never going back to the world where Hamas is ruling Gaza. Those days are done.
No, but I mean, I think the concern is that the ideology behind Hamas.
Agreed.
The American intelligence seems to suggest for every Hamas terrorist who's been killed, they've already replaced them with somebody that shares that ideology.
Scott's knockout performance left Piers' convoluted logic in the dust, and Anthony Scaramucci, aka Mr. Mooch, sounded like he was reciting last year's headlines. In the end, did Scott win the debate? Absolutely. His razor-sharp wit and unapologetical takedown not only polarized the panel, but also sent a clear message. Half measures and half truths have no place in this arena. While Piers' arguments seemed to wobble under the weight of his own contradictions, Mr. Mooch's bravado couldn't hold a candle to Scott's precision. But the audience is clearly leaning towards the masterclass and debut strategy, and Scott delivered, leaving the rest to scramble for scraps of the fallout. If you enjoyed this video, guys, I ask for you to like, share, and let's beat the algorithm together. And until next time, stay sharp and critical. Bye for now.